Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Hope you are well, and welcome to this first session around adaptive leadership through the generations. It's a topic that's hot on our minds here and obviously hot on your mind, which is why you're here. My name is Christine Khor and I'm the CEO and founder of People Coach, and today with my colleagues here, Edan, Haddock and Peter Treloar, they'll introduce themselves in a minute. We will be spending the next sort of 45 minutes or so sharing with you our insights, our learnings, but we definitely want it as an interactive activity and answer as many questions as possible. There's somebody there that's got their microphone on and we can hear you chatting to your teammates. Would you mind turning it off, please? That would be fantastic. Thank you. So as I said, my name's Christine Khor, CEO and founder of People Coach, and I'd like to introduce Peter, who is...
That's me. I'm Peter. Hello. I'm sorry, I got muted as well in the mass meeting, so I wasn't on that. I'm Peter. I'm the CEO and founder of Tally, and super excited to be here today because adaptive leadership and helping leaders understand their people and the personalizing leadership and knowing how to connect with their people on a one-to-one basis is kind of what Tally is all about. So this is a topic that's super close to our heart, and looking forward to sharing more.
And Edan.
Hi, everyone. I'm Edan. I'm head of talent and people experience for Movember. Really excited to catch up. We, a lot of people think Movember and they think those guys in Melbourne that grow moustaches. We're actually a global organisation. We're in Australia, Canada, Ireland, United Kingdom, United States. Very complex matrix organisation and multi-generational, so a really hot topic for us and one that we're diving quite deeply into internally. So excited to talk about what we're learning and some of the challenges we're facing.
And in all fairness, Eden, even though we don't want to think about you guys just as mustaches, you do have a mustache and you have one on your t-shirt as well. So
hey,
you're setting it up for
a
yourself.
Gold one as well. I'm Platinum Club.
You are.
So the reason why we've all come together, so Edan from Movember, Peter from Tally and us here from People Coach, is that we all have very similar beliefs around the importance of leadership and the fact that competitive advantage, especially in the era of AI, is going to be based on humans and the way we lead, the way we communicate, the way we work together. At People Coach, our goal is to drive and develop leaders across organisations through the democratisation of coaching. And we work very closely with the Tally team because Tally gives us insights regarding how cultures are working, how individuals are working. But I'll hand over to Peter to give just a bit of an update there on how, because you'll explain much better than I do what you do.
Yeah, sure. And Chris, did you want to share your screen as well? I'm not sure if you're going through the slides.
Oh, I am.
You're not sharing just yet.
Okay.
Well, I can't see it unless I got that wrong.
Okay, can you see now?
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. Yeah. So Tally, like I said before, this topic today is close to our heart, and Tally is essentially a business that kind of recognizes that leadership, and it's something that a lot of us already know, leadership is the secret to unlocking engagement at work. Engagement is the secret to unlocking productivity, and you can't really lead someone unless you understand someone. So Tally is all about kind of recognizing that 50% of our behavior is linked to our personality. There's always been some really great insights in personality data that help to understand people, engage them, motivate them, manage their wellness, whatever it might be, right from recruitment right through the employee life cycle. But it's been kind of locked up in boring old reports for a really long time. So our business is all about helping leaders to see and understand their people, to personalize the way they connect with their people in all of those moments that matter right across the employee experience. And we've built this really cool thing called Ask Tally, which is like an org psych AI that you can access whenever you need to ask questions about your people, resolve tensions, and solve problems. And for us, partnering with companies like People Coach, who bring the coaching expertise, and then we bring the AI and the personality expertise to come up with something really cool at the other end.
And the reason why we have to do that is that, one size does not fit all. So leadership development, communication has to be customized, has to be data driven, and has to be accessible to all leaders in an organisation, not just a few at the top. So what we're going to get out of the next 45 or 60 minutes or so is, how is the workplace changing with multiple generations? This is the first one that we can have up to 5 generations in the workplace. What's important to each of those generations, the values and the motivations, because again, one size does not fit all. How is communication changing and how do we all have to adapt? What do we need as leaders to create thriving workforces? And then Edan's role as head of talent here there at Movember is to really share some of the on-the-job learnings regarding the changing role of the purpose of work on individuals and through the generations, and the impact that's having on recruitment. And then we'll lead into, once the people are recruited and onboarded onto an organisation, then how do we ensure that the communication's great and they can stand up as effective leaders? So the first thing I want to go through is the changing cultural mix of the Australian workforce. And I know a lot of the people here come from organisations that are more global, and in global it's even, more diverse. But if we look at the 2 census reports, back in 1996, the country of origin was mainly English, followed by New Zealand, Italy, Vietnam, and Scotland. So very European, very Anglo-Saxon, all except for, Vietnam, which was based on the Vietnam War. Fast forward to 2021, and the countries of origin are still English, is still the number 1, followed by India, China, then New Zealand, then Philippines. Now, if you think about just at a very top level, how a Indian first generation, second generation Indian person is going to lead, is going to communicate, the values, the motivations are going to be very different from a first or second generation, from a New Zealander or a Scottish person. I'm first generation Chinese, and whilst I always say that I sound like Australian, if you didn't see my face, you'd think that I'm Aussie as Aussie. I'd say my accent's bogan. A lot of my values, the way I think about it, and I'm proud of it, right? But a lot of the way I think, the way I work, the values, the way I think about achievement and success and hierarchy are very, very much wedded in the way I was brought up. So we have to now accommodate that in this very diverse workforce to get the best out of people. So that's the first, I suppose, mega trend of the changing makeup of the Australian workforce. We then go to the changing generations. And what's interesting here, and I'm going to highlight this is McCrindle research. Highly, highly recommend anyone that's interested in any of this work, go and look up the McCrindle work. It's incredible. So what they do is they do a lot of research on all the generations, and what they've noticed from a leadership style. So there's a whole lot of info around how they read, how they communicate, but we're most interested in leadership. Is builders were more controlling. So do as I say, you're lucky to have a job, we put you in the mines and you just make me lots of money. Baby boomers more directing. I'm the boss, you're not the boss. Again, do as you're told. Gen Xers, me, more coordinating. I'm still at the center of everything, or Gen Xers are, but then we move people around, we delegate, but it's still a bit, spoken wheel. I'm telling you still what to do. Gen Y, and these are broad things. I'm not saying every person acts like this in this generation, but and then Gen Y is more about guiding and supporting. Now, Gen Z is this, and I'm living with this. I mean, we have a couple of people in our people coach office, but I am raising 2 of them, which is a very interesting beast, right? And it's more about empowering. And then Gen Alpha, which is the one that actually scares me, and they're the ones coming into the workforce now because they're sort of 15, so they could be getting their first part-time job or going into their first apprenticeship. They want to be inspired, right? So imagine as a leader turning up, and if we think about just the everyday stress of being a leader, like turning up, executing the job that our bosses tell us to do, dealing with our teams, dealing with ourselves and our own chaos and all the stuff we're dealing with. On top of that, we don't have to be just empowering and a good leader to our team. We now have to be inspiring. So this is a big challenge for leaders moving forward. And I want you to think about that and the expectations that are now being put on leaders to be effective. What is important to people at this level is, for baby boomers, Gen X and Gen Y, it was fairly similar. What we wanted out of a leader was clear communication, integrity, and to be approachable, right? That's all we wanted. We put up with our bosses not really caring too much for us. We put up with them being very blunt and telling us what to do. We put up with them being a bit rude sometimes and not being great at their jobs because they had the title and they earned it, right? They did the hours, they did the time, they got the job. That's their right. They got the title. We dealt with some of that. Gen Y is the first one that said, actually, I want you to have integrity, but I also want you to be accountable, right? So a little bit more pressure. We then go to Gen Z. Approachable, clear communication. Integrity's gone. So I don't know what that says, whether they don't trust institutions or people anymore. But what's come up is empathy, which is, I want you to understand me. I want you to acknowledge my situation, and I want you to work with me in a way that suits me. So the old school, this is how it is, this is how I am, this is the leader, this is how I speak, and you've just got to deal with it, is gone. And so what that means for a leader like me, a Gen X leader, is I've now got to change my language and my style for all the people that I lead, not the other way around. It used to be the other way around. And this, when we're coaching people, is one of the biggest issues. So the number of times I have a Gen X or even a Gen Y leader saying to me, and definitely a baby boomer, they're lucky to have a job and they should just do what they're told or they can leave. The number of times I hear that, I could be a millionaire, right? But those days are gone, literally gone. And then, as I said, inspiring and understanding are the next things. So I guess what's really interesting here is, Edan, from your perspective, I know that you're seeing all this, we had a quick chat about it, and I know you've got some very significant views on this. How is this changing the way you have to recruit and onboard your people?
Yeah, it's really interesting. And I think what unites all of the generations in the workforce now is, I think we're all seeking purpose. I think if we're looking at Gen X, we've had that we're at that stage in our lives where we've had that moment that perhaps we don't want to be working to make rich people richer. And I think there is that kind of divide in the workplace. But you look at your Gen Ys and your Gen Zs, and I think the reason why they are seeking purpose, and I'll be pretty bold with my statement here. I think, that kind of security and property and all the things that our parents and the baby boomers and Gen Xers were working towards, like, the Great Australian Dream has really changed. I think the Great Australian Dream is no longer owning property and settling and, having your little piece of earth. I think the Great Australian Dream really is happiness and health, and the way you work contributes to that. So when we're seeing the expectations of things like flexibility, development and satisfaction in our work, I think, the one thing that's really uniting us now is saying, well, I want to do something that is not going to be about making rich people rich. And, money isn't my primary motivation anymore, because you've got those kind of factors like cost of living and property being completely out of reach. You want to be really fulfilled in the work that you're doing. And I think we unite, like if we look at, Gen Xers, you've got the hippie generation in there as well, right? Like we've all got that kind of, we want to change the world. So for us, it's even more so because we are an organization that, we're men's health, right? Like our primary purpose is to help men live happier and longer lives. And there are some stats I can share on that as we go through. But for us, it's people are connected to our cause. They're making that conscious decision that, yes, I want to change the world and I want to make a difference. And that's where, personalization comes into it, because we want people to share their stories. And some of those stories are quite are quite moving and they're quite emotive, and it can be people that have lost a parent to, a father to prostate cancer. It can be people whose husbands have struggled with mental health. We have people that are attracted to working with us because they have lost a friend to suicide. Like, they're very, very, deep and raw emotive responses that come out. So it's a real challenge to make sure that we're honoring those stories and we're respecting those stories. And the only way we can do that is through personalization and making sure in this AI world that we're connecting with people on a personal level, and it's finding that balance, right? So it's a really interesting environment to work in, to see that everyone is coming to us with that primary purpose, to help make a difference in the world. And how do we honor that, right? And how do we, I suppose, make sure we're communicating to the different generations through that process? And I think the way to do that is to have a little bit of fun with it. We get people to talk about our values and their connection to our values, and that's really important through the process. But we want people to show their personality as well, because they're already telling us some pretty heavy topics as they're coming through the process. So we do things like our candidates embed their Spotify playlists, and that opens up really personalized conversations. We have the option for people to tell us, fun facts about themselves, like they can play La Cucaracha on their teeth with a spoon, right? Like, it's really hyper personalized, and we're able to bring that out and make people feel safe and authentic as they're having those conversations with us. But we are embracing AI through that process as well, because every single one of those stories, I've got a team of 3 humans. And within my structure, I do have one AI agent that is helping us have those conversations, because we simply can't have 200 conversations per role globally with all the recruitment that we do. So I think it's just a really interesting environment we're in at the moment. And I think purpose is really the thing that's uniting us.
So
I think purpose is a...
Sorry.
So I was going to say, I think purpose is a really interesting point, and obviously it's the core of almost everything that we're talking about here, and isn't new. Like, self-determination theory and purpose has been around for a really long time, and you can see it behind this research as well, that, when you look at described self, independent is a line in every generation, and people have always wanted to work out their own identity and how to describe themselves. There's a really important layer of understanding your own purpose and your identity, and then the world you live in and how you're allowed to express that identity. And for baby boomers, when they first started working, they just had to do what they were told. Like, that was what the workplace was like. And in today's workplace, you do have a lot more flexibility. You are supposed to be yourself. It obviously is different across different workplaces, for sure, in different countries, but you are supposed to be yourself, or you can be yourself. And also, the way our role models and the way we consume media has changed. So you see people just being themselves and living their own life, and that, the fragmentation of media and what role models are is also sort of creating different boundaries around that as well. So the purpose story has been true for every generation. I think it's sort of important to think about it being expressed differently with today's generations, same as in the past. Sorry, Chris, you're about to say something.
I think what the issue that creates, and I think it's all true, but the previous generations, were socialized to believe that, the family home, our own picket fence was mandatory. And there's an old saying by, I think, Andrew Carnegie, that said, always hire someone with a mortgage, because you know that they're stuck, right, to work with you, right, because they need your money. But very true. I mean, think about back in the 1800s or 1900s, right? So, but the reality now is that not only do this generation, and actually McCrindle research shows it, this generation do not believe that they will actually have the capacity to buy a home. Therefore, so not even they don't want it, they don't believe they can have it even if they do want it. And so therefore, that's the stick of, well, I have to stay in this job with this leader in this organisation because I need to pay my mortgage. That's gone. And so therefore, the reason why people are staying or leaving is purpose, employer brand, how much I like and how much I'm growing with my manager. And so again, that competitive advantage is no longer the 15% bonus or the 10% bonus. It's, is my manager working with me and helping me, and is he or she a good person, or are they just, dills? I'd use a different word if I wasn't being, but are they just dills that I don't want to be around, and actually I can go somewhere else? And by the way, I can make money in all sorts of different ways. I can be an Uber driver. I can, do a side hustle. I could do contracting. I can do all these other things to make money. So I don't need to have your 9-to-5 job and you telling me what to do. And I think one of the most important things around AI, and I was chatting to someone before, is that the impact of AI implementation into organisations. I mean, no organisation is doing it well. Let's face it, we're all experimenting. But the impact of on employer brand, if we don't get it right, which leads into purpose, is, and I'm not going to name them, but there's 2 organisations that have been in the papers lately around AI implementation and the impact that that's had on their employer brand, but also on their consumer brands. Right? Because you, as a consumer, would you go, oh yeah, I want to go and work with that organisation, or I want to, use that organisation's services. We don't want to do that because of this purpose, which is far more embedded, I think, in this next generation. So that's something to think about too, strategically, as senior leaders, how we implementing and how we're communicating all these changes that we know have to be made.
I think so. I think the other thing that, Christine, if you don't mind me just adding to that, I think what is really important as a leader is in terms of people not, when we're talking about the generations with the picket fence and when that was attainable and now that it's not, is really the fluidity of role design and the flexibility and creativity around that, where the generations that aren't stuck, it's not about linear career path within organizations and within roles. It's more around, to your point, being really creative around how you make money, and what your career might look like, because I don't think people are seeking out taking the next step and moving up to leadership. And what that means for us as leaders is, how do we make sure that our roles are, for our team members, able to flex and expand to give them that satisfaction and that creativity, which are the positive things that leads to innovation, right? But I think the way we've designed positions within our organizations and our org structures is not set up for the future. And then you overlay AI in that and it becomes even more complex. So, it's understanding what those core drivers and motivations are. And I think that's where we're all kind of struggling, because how do we take a traditional organizational structure and workforce planning and just completely flip it and make it fluid? Like, that's just like a huge change for organizations, right?
Yeah.
And people are stuck, right? Because, I mean, you mentioned it before that you've got 4 employees, 1 agent and 3 humans. And we know in our coaching, that's one of the things that's coming up more and more. It's like, I'm creating structures now with 2 types of teams. And the way you communicate to an agent versus the way you communicate to a human are so, like, basically the way you speak to an agent is like a baby boomer. Controlling, direct, concise, do what I say, don't question me, just follow my instructions. With a human, it's about coaching, developing, understanding, empathy. So as a leader then, how do you develop those skills? And that's something that we're hearing and learning about. And then if you think about the people making the decisions on AI are not AI natives, or aren't even digital natives. Well, none of us are AI, but we're not even digital natives, right? So how are we getting our heads around all of this to see? Because, and even now, like, I'm doing a lot of testing in it, and you go, oh, but it's not like a human. Well, nobody expects it to be like a human. So why am I putting that lens over it? So it's just an interesting thing for leaders as they go through the generations of investing and bringing AI in. What benchmarks are we using?
Yeah, but I think we need to humanize it. I think that's the future. Totally. I mean, our agent, his name's Joel, and he has a face, and he's, and he has the Movember tone of voice, and he talks to the general public, and we consider him as even though he's an AI agent, we still consider him as a human part of our structure, and he's still in our org chart, you know? So I think we're going to be seeing more and more humanization of these tools.
Absolutely.
Which again, then when does personality come into that, Peter? Like that's just mind blowing, right? Will they have their own personality within our team that complements our team? And how do we work with them to bring out our personality and, you know, strengths and all of that? Like it's mind boggling. It's such an interesting time.
Yeah, I was going to ask you who's your favorite team member out of the four, but maybe I shouldn't. Where does Joel sit in the hierarchy?
I don't have
one. This research on the screen, though, is super interesting. So there's some more data to support the earlier slides that we saw around some of the changing behaviors and values of different generations. And this research that came out of, I think it came out of Canada earlier this year, was super, super powerful because it talked about the differences between what are the values from hiring managers and then what are the values of the Gen Z employees that they're interviewing. And the reason why it's super interesting is because in every interview, in every employment context, or in performance reviews or coaching situations or whatever it might be, there's one individual who's on one side of the table and another individual on the other side of the table, and they're bringing their own bias and their perceptions and the things that are important to them in that conversation, and they're seeing the world through their own lens. And so what this research has showed us is that Gen X and sort of late stage baby boomer hiring managers are sitting down in interviews and saying the things that are most important to me and that I'm looking for in the person sitting across the table from me are a focus on achievement, understanding the scope of work, and also work centrism. So, you know, placing work as a priority at the heart of who you are and what you do in your life. And then what the research has uncovered is that when you look at the Gen Z workforce that's being interviewed for these roles, those three value traits are actually right down the bottom of the list. I believe, don't quote me on this, but I'm confident to make up numbers, but I believe there were only 11 values in the list. It might have gone up to 14, but either way, they were right down the bottom. So achievement, scope, and work centrism were right down the bottom. The three values that went to the top of the list were, you know, similar to what we've been talking about already today, is around eudaimonia, which is a very interesting word, but it's about your personal well-being and fun. So that's the number one thing that's important to this generation. The second one was non-civi, which is about a focus on being helpfulness. So not about you, about helping others, about looking after community, purpose, understanding the role that you play in society, those kind of things. And then voice was the third one, which is kind of interesting as well, which is around topics like things like authenticity and self-expression. So again, back to that idea around purpose, about who you are as an individual, your independence, what things stand for you. Those values are now at the top of the list. So if you're a hiring manager and you're trying to sell a role to somebody or trying to play in a competitive work market or trying to retain great employees as well, and you're in a conversation with them talking about achievement and work, potentially they're tuning out a little bit. But if you're talking about the role that your company plays in the community, the role that an individual can play, how they can express themselves, and those kind of things, then the person on the other side of the table is going to be sitting up and listening and actually paying attention to what you're saying. And interestingly as well, as part of this research, they had to actually uncover additional values that they hadn't previously tracked to try to capture some of these things that I just kind of knew. Like these things weren't super important 20 or 30 years ago when these things first started getting measured, and now they have to track it as part of the way that they're talking to people and measuring values as well. So that idea of bias and sort of seeing both sides of the story is becoming more and more important as we look across generations. And Chris, on the next slide, if you weren't flicking over.
I'm just going to share a personal story on that. So my son's 21. Luckily, he's not here because he can't hear me, but he's 21. But when he was about 19, after he just finished school, I said to him, you got to get a job, go and get a job. Like Woolworths up the road, Coles up the road, just go and get a job, right? And he looked up and he went, I'm not doing an interview with either of those organisations. And I said, why not? And he said, because I have to do a video. And I said, right. And he said, and that is inhumane and disrespectful to me as a human to make me do a video. And I said, and he said, it's wasting my time. And I said, but sweet, you have time to waste. You don't have a job. You're living like you've got nothing. You've got no experience working. You've got nothing. Like and he's a bit of the Asian mum, like work. So, and he said, I will not work for an organisation that diminishes humans so much that they won't even have an interview with them. And I was like, Oh my God. Now that's,
Wow.
and I said, I love your righteousness and I love your values. And it's all very easy when mummy's still paying the bills, right? So fast forward, he's gone and got a job and he's, very diligent and he turns up and he does all the things that he needs to do. But I think it was the first time that I actually saw it in action, this real focus on, you need to understand me, you need to respect me, you need to care about how I feel. And if I get any sense that you don't do any of those things, then your employer brand to me is off the table. Like I'm not doing it, which was, I think, really fascinating and very jarring for exes. And then I'm going to put the cultural lens on, right? The cultural lens of, Asian parents. And again, I had one Indian friend whose daughter got enough to get into medicine but decided to do dentistry or something because it was more work-life balance when she in the future, and the mother could not understand why the daughter would not do medicine but would only do dentistry for work-life balance. She's like, what is work-life balance? I don't even know what that is. So there's really interesting things that are happening around the value set. So it's one's purpose, but the different values of the leaders is very confronting, I think, for a lot of people.
And I think they're very valuable points because without this context and without understanding the data behind it and the changing in mindsets and changes in values, your first reaction is tension. You're like, I don't understand. I'm confused and I think you're stupid, so I'm not going to talk to you anymore. Like you just get to tension really quickly. And that's kind of what we're seeing on this chart here. So 67% of companies are reporting that conflicts across generations at work, and 61% of Gen Z wish that there was less focus on achievement. And at the surface level, you just get lots of confusion. You hear these stories about baby boomers or Gen X asking a Gen Z to do something, and their response back at work is why? Why should I do it? Or whatever it might be. Like just really, and they're just in there going, I don't understand. It's your job. You should do it. It's very confusing for people. And until you start unraveling some of these layers and realizing it is actually just changes in values, changes in personality, changes in behaviors, changes in social systems that are leading to these different perceptions, and then start to deal with that. It's not right or wrong. It's just about how you respond to it that matters at the other end. And Eden, I think you have some examples at your end about how you're dealing with generational differences and conflicts between generations.
Yeah, I mean, I think conflicts are a harsher
Maybe not
word,
conflict.
but
Just
yeah.
differences.
I think for us, and I'll talk at an external lens and in terms of the community work that we do. We were born, like Movember was born as a very humanistic movement, right? We were, a couple of guys having a beer at a pub in Fitzroy, coming up with an idea because one of their fathers had cancer, and they came up with that idea of growing moustaches. And the reason they were able to grow Movember to what it is today was very humanistic. It was in person, it was through events, it was through community. And that's how they were able to talk to men and get men on board and start having these conversations around men's health and really shifting that dial. The conflict, I suppose, if using that word, is that's not where the future generations are. So if we're looking at how do we talk to young men, it's all in a digital world, and that's what our focus needs to be. One of the really important programs of work that we're running at the moment globally is around masculinities, because young men are engaging in a digital world, and what they're seeing is not necessarily a healthy male, and what they're being educated is not a healthy male. So we need to be able to talk to young men in the environment where they want to listen, because they're not going to listen to us in a classroom, right? Anyone out there that has got teenage boys, that's not how to get them talking about their health and getting to shift the dial on masculinities and health more broadly. So I think that's where, for us, being able to become more digital in terms of how we engage, embracing AI, where we're a brand that is all around human connection and personality, that's really, it's really quite complex, because the men that we're serving, if you're looking at men and educating men in terms of prostate cancer, you're looking at an older generation. So talking to them in a digital world is very different. But interestingly, highest number and the demographic of young men in terms of cancer is testicular cancer. So we need to talk to them about checking their nuts in a digital world, right? Like, so it's all of these different generational approaches that we have to tackle. But then when it comes to leadership, which is what we're talking about here, we have leaders that are now having to work in a digital world because those global leaders are part of a different generation, or they've come through Movember where it's all been community. And they're needing to lead a team that are focused in digital. And, when we've got the rise of AI coming in, and we are really embracing AI because men are funny folk, and men actually, interestingly, would prefer to talk to AI than they would sometimes, around their health to a human. So there's all of that complexity as well. But it's just this whole, it's all of these different approaches, and how do we weave them in? And then how do we upskill our people? And how do we look at, okay, where does their role play in all of this in terms of our purpose as well? And how do we scope that out, and how do we make sure they're contributing? So, it's just a really interesting environment. It's that blend of humanistic and digital, and how do we bring it all together? And then the overlay of AI, and how do we humanize the AI so it brings it all together?
And
So go ahead.
I was just going to say, with respect to leadership, I think what's really interesting, like the traditional thought of what a leader is someone that knows all the answers. So a direct report goes to a leader and then we got promoted because we know everything. But actually, what amazing leaders do now is they accept that they don't know. And to your point, Eden, I think you sort of said nobody's an expert on AI. Like none of us know what's going on, right? And in fact, the younger generation might know more than the leaders know. So actually changing the mindset as a leader to go, my role as a leader is to be discerning and to be strategic and to take information and collaborate to find a solution with my team, versus my role is to tell my team what to do. And I think that's a big mind shift for leaders. And again, that's what we do in coaching, is to support leaders to be able to acknowledge that making that change to collaboration and understanding and purpose and empathy, and to avoid this conflict, is around accepting that you don't have all the answers.
Well, that's right.
Okay, and it's a hard thing.
Yeah. If I look at my team, removing the AI agent in my team, but they're digital natives and I'm not. I'm part of a different generation where I'm, I think we're talking about that in a moment, but I'm part of a micro gen between X and Y. Digital sort of came as I was in my teenage years, right, when we were really embracing that. So they know more than I do. I mean, if we're looking at, shifting the way we work at Movember, and primarily how we're targeting community is through, digital channels, and we still do amazing work within sporting codes and all of that sort of stuff. That's a huge part of what we do as well. It's that blend of the two. But in terms of ways of working, AI adoption, if we're looking at literacy in terms of digital literacy, right? My team know way more than I do. So how do I lead their development because they want to learn more?
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, totally. Yep. And it's and that's something that we talk about on the next slide, just the differences between the generations and the communication styles, and sort of realizing that and I'll talk about it in a sec as well from a personality lens. Like we see that something like 60% of workers believe that their organization doesn't communicate well across age groups. And the reason for that is that, just as you've been saying, a lot of these different generations and different people, and even within the same generation, there's different preferences as well. There are some people who prefer face-to-face conversations, reports, reading, preparing, whatever it might be. Other people prefer instant messaging, digital, email, video, whatever, some things that, a whole bunch of the things that my kids do that I have no idea what they're doing. I don't understand why it's funny or interesting, but apparently it is. So there's these different ways that different generations are communicating. And I guess, again, the important difference in that is that we now kind of have the tools available to us to communicate in a myriad of different ways, and neither are right or wrong, but we need to understand that the way the way that we communicate, not just what we communicate, but the way that we communicate has meaning, and it is received by people in different ways as well. So when we're going out, and this is just a very traditional thing that people who've been working for a long time who are used to certain norms, not necessarily older, but people who are used to certain norms act in a certain way. You have a meeting to discuss something. You bring people together to workshop something. You share a report for everyone to read before a session. But that's just kind of not the way people behave anymore. People want data to be delivered to them in a way that they want to consume it, and they want information, insights, and engagement to be delivered to them in a way they want to consume it as well. And we now have, like, the cool part is that we have cool AI tools now that can take one piece of content, cut it into a million different versions, and deliver it to people in the way that they want to consume it as well. So sort of removing this bias of this is how things should be to how do you want it to be, and I can just deliver it to you that way, in that personalized way, is kind of a little bit of a mindset shift in that adaptive leadership spectrum.
I agree. Like I think for me, like I'm someone in terms of communications, like and in terms of any kind of, you know, planning. I'm the old school, get everyone in a room with a whiteboard, right? But my team don't want that. They want to be bouncing ideas via Slack, right? So I've got to adapt my mindset to think, hey, just because I want to be drawing on a whiteboard and I'm a visual person, that's not how I'm going to get the best out of my team. It's how I'm going to get the best out of me. But I have to shift, right? Like I think it is its mindset. Yeah.
The other thing I was going to say to that is at a macro level is our attention spans have dropped. So it's not just the way we communicate and the channels, it's the frequency. So officially now a goldfish has 8-second attention span, and humans have 7.25, and the younger the generation, the lower. Right. So what that means is not only do you have to communicate in the way that the people want to absorb the information, you need to do it multiple times. So having one town hall and bringing everybody in and saying, this is the strategic plan and this is our objectives for the year and this is what I expect you to do is not going to cut it. Right. You got to do it again, do it again, do it again, do it again. And we're not doing that as leaders. We're saying, I've told you this, you should know it. But actually, we've got to repeat it over and over and over again.
Just while you were saying that, I was watching the number of participants in the session, and someone just dropped out. So they obviously their attention span ran out while you, while you were saying that conversation. I was just wanted to see what happened. The other thing that's interesting, sort of last piece of data that I wanted to touch on today, is that we are actually even seeing fundamental shifts in the underlying personalities of people. So when we talk about personality, we're talking, you know, in this context about those deep-seated fundamental personality traits that are kind of with us from our genetics in our early childhood. They stay sort of durable from your early 20s to your early 60s. They're in everyone, everywhere in the world. And these sort of deep-seated personality traits account for something like 40 to 50% of your behavior. They've been very stable for a really long time. But what we've seen over the last 10 years or so is actually a real shift in the benchmarks. So where for traits, things like conscientiousness, which is a trait that's all about focusing on achievement and outcomes and goals and being reliable and diligent and dependable, we've actually seen that that's dropped. The average for the younger, for 16 to 39-year-olds has actually dropped by 20 points over that last 10-year period. So again, straight back to that values thing we're talking about, straight back to all of the other data that we've been talking about, even just deep down inside these people, the drive for focusing on completion and goals has changed. And what's really important in this, well, one, it's really significant and we need to pay attention to it. But two, it doesn't mean that they don't do their job. It just means that the way you communicate to them and motivate them and drive them needs to change. You can't go to someone and say, can you please do this? And 20 years ago, someone would have said, yes, of course, I'll get it to you by the end of today. And this younger generation's like, I'll do it. And I'll find my own way to do it. It's just a very different way of responding. And you can't see that as negative. You just got to work out how to work with it. And on the flip side, we're seeing a trait which is called neuroticism, which is not a very nice word to put up on a slide, but it basically is related to the fluctuation you get in your emotions. So if you're highly neurotic, you're very emotionally sensitive. You get a lot of variance in things like anxiety, moodiness, temperamentality, those kind of things. And that has actually jumped up by 10 points over the past 10 years as well in the younger generation. So a much higher tendency to be emotionally variable, to be more emotionally responsive, to really feel things in a slightly different way, and then a much lower focus on things like just focusing on the goal, resilience, put your head down, grind, get the work done as well. And again, this is just really, really important things to keep in mind. Firstly, taking off any layer that this is right or wrong. You can't change this stuff. Most of it's kind of fixed. So we can't say be more conscientious or be less neurotic. That's not how it works. You just have to realize that when, like I said earlier, you're in a room talking to somebody who sees and feels the world in a different way, you need to adjust how you're leading them, because the way that they're responding is not how people responded even just 10 years ago. And it's quite a dramatic shift.
So I think one of the things around, because conscientiousness, when I first saw this slide, it was like, what do you mean? People don't, get their job done. And to your point, it's not about that. I think one of the interesting things that I read recently was the traditional way of being promoted was that you showed that you worked up. So you worked to the next level, you proved, you worked really hard, you worked extra hours, you proved to your boss that you were awesome. And then when you'd proved yourself for a little while, then they would give you the title and the promotion, right? And again, if you go being very stereotypical, if a Gen X then goes, well, you can have the promotion when you show me that you can do it, this next generation are going, nah, you show me, you give me the promotion, then I'll show you what I can do. And there's a few reasons. One, I think, is this whole conscientiousness piece, right? Are they driven as much to get the promotion as we were? The second one is they've actually seen that companies aren't loyal. So I can work really hard and not be paid for it, and then you still can make me redundant or churn me out. And the third thing is, what's happened to our parents? What's happened to their parents? They've seen their parents being restructured out or AI'd out or whatever it may be. So the conscientiousness is more around, in my mind, it's I will do the job that I'm paid for, but I won't go over and above. And when we think of conscientiousness, we think about going over and above what we're paid for. And I think that's the big thing that leaders, more senior leaders, need to understand. And it also comes down to working at home and all those sort of things as well. So, yeah.
And not then, being afraid to try something different with careers. Like, it's this kind of squiggly career pathway thing that's going on, I think. Where you're more, rather than waiting for a promotion, I don't like saying waiting for a promotion, but expecting a promotion with an organization is probably a better way to put it. People are just a bit more curious going, I actually think that sounds like something cool that I want to have a crack at. And they'll, without, the saving for a deposit for a home, as you were talking about earlier, Christine, people are just more open to that. So I find that really interesting because and I might talk about it now. I'm part of a generation which is people dub a Xennial generation, which is between 1977 and 1983, and we're kind of that micro generation that sits between generation X and Y, and it's so different to us. Like I kind of jokingly call us the Madonna generation, where it was all around. If you work really hard and you do it in a very authentic way and take no prisoners and really back yourself and go, then success will come, right? Like those were our role models as we were growing up. So it was all that kind of grafting and, I want to be successful, so I'm going to put the effort in and I'm going to work those kind of long hours. And this is what my goal is. My goal is, in terms of Madonna, to be the most famous pop musician in the world, right? And just kept going and going and going. But these other generations are just like, I don't know what I want to do. I'm just going to have a little bit of fun and be creative with my career and see where it takes me. And that's kind of very, very different to the way, we were raised, the way we looked at our parents and the way they worked. And in terms of, I don't know, for me, it's kind of like, well, what are you trying to achieve? Where do you want me to guide you? How do you want me to support you on that journey when that journey is just like that? It's really interesting.
But again, I feel like that's super interesting, and I'm a Xennial as well. And I didn't realize that until I talked to you the other day that I was, but I'm really glad that I can identify with a generation now. But I think it comes down to that mindset thing and realizing, even just what you said then, it's not that they're not focused on achievement. It's like, what does achievement mean for that generation? And and there's even like one of the comments in the chat sort of talking about it as well. It's sort of like, you don't have to say you need to be more like this or less like this. It's just like, I need to understand where you sit on this trait, because then that's my secret to decoding you and understanding how to motivate you. And I need to remove my own bias and put your hat on and know that if I communicate to you in a way, like if I want you to stay in this job for 20 years and work really hard, I actually need to talk to you about the variety of the work and how it's going to connect to purpose and how it's going to connect to these bigger picture things. And I'll give you a month off for a year to go and travel. And, I need to just realize that I need to shape that role to suit your needs, not to try to fit you into the bucket of how I used to see work when I was younger. So it is all about that mindset shift into seeing all of these things sit inside everyone, all these values, all these personality traits, all of these behaviors. You just need to tap into it in a slightly different way, depending on the human you're connecting with.
So we've got a few more slides, but I'm wondering whether there's any questions from the audience, because we've got sort of 10 minutes left, and I'd rather, if there's any questions to answer. Peter, did you see any in the chat?
There was one there, but it's gone now.
Okay.
Can I ask you one? Because I'd love to hear your perspective on one, actually. Like, if we're just leading on what we were talking about, do you think, in terms of expectations of generations and, the shift in motivations and values, etc., HR functions have always been focused on retaining performers, retaining talent. Do you think that shift could be more, we're comfortable with short-term engagement and employment for people to come in and seek that challenge and then perhaps move away?
So from my perspective, I don't think anyone's comfortable with it, because the cost of churn is significant. Right? So loss of productivity, and not just of a technical skill, but also of just the onboarding, knowing how to use the, HRS system to book your holidays or, log in a laptop, all that sort of stuff. So I don't think anyone's comfortable with it, because there's ROI data that shows the longer you can keep someone, the more profitable your business is. I think the shift is, how do we create customizable career pathways and development pathways that suit the individuals as well as the organisation. And I guess one thing that I do want to work with when we're working with our, newer leaders, is that it's still a mutual exchange between organisations and individuals. So yes, bring yourself and, demand to be spoken to in a certain way, and you want flexibility, but don't forget that you're actually being employed to deliver a service and an output, and there's mutual exchange that needs to require. So you need to give as well as getting. You don't get paid for turning up and just enjoying yourself and doing what you like to do and having fun, right? That's not, you still have to have output, you still have to do things. But I think it's the acknowledgement of, how do we make career pathways more flexible? How do we develop our people to ensure that they have the skills to transition? How do we ensure leaders know when and how to have the conversations to ensure that they're a retention conversation, not an exit conversation when the boredom hits in? Those leadership skills can actually deliver billions of dollars to the bottom line. When you think about disengagement of employees, is like $211 billion in Australia. Disengaged employees are costing us, right? So I think that's a long-winded way to say is, nobody likes it, but you got to deal with it, because if you don't, you're just going to have 6-month churn.
Thank you. I think you touched on a topic that I annoy people about all the time, is that now is definitely a time to start reimagining some of these traditional thinking theories and thinking about HR practices and the way that we retain employees. And even that point about, you need to come in and learn the HRIS. Pretty soon you won't need to use an HRIS. You just come in, talk to your AI and say, I need to book a trip, and it'll say, here's what you can do and can't do. You don't need to log into anything pretty soon. So like, there's an opportunity to really think about people being fluid, and when all tasks and all knowledge becomes equal, like the mundane routine mathematical repetitive work is just replaced at some stage in different industries in different phases, but it will be replaced. Then you're left with is people and creativity and collaboration and expertise, and that can actually move across companies much more easily. There isn't that ramp up of learning the technical skills in a role. Unless the practical skills are different, but the technical skills are going to change a little bit. There is a question also in the chat about productivity, which I'm just about to read out. So I'll just read out. It says, I was going to ask about productivity. There seems to be a disconnect between organizations needing higher productivity and demanding more from individuals versus what individuals need and the changing needs of individuals.
Yep.
Yes, I agree.
So I think part of it is actually it goes back to what Edan you said in my perspective, it comes back to what you said in the first place, which was people don't want to just work harder to make rich people richer. And any of the data, you look at the divide between the has and has not is getting bigger and bigger. And I think that this is a mindset shift that needs to be made by organizations and investors and stakeholders, because the thing is, productivity for productivity's sake is not going to be enough of a motivator for individuals to work longer and harder. And in fact, I'd be questioning some of the decisions that are being made by organizations to get more productivity by replacing teams of people with AI. What will that actually do to the bottom line when they start to lose their customers and start to lose their better employees, right? Because it's always the better, the more high potential employees have more high potential opportunities, right? So they're going to be the ones that are going, no, I'm not putting up with this anymore. I'm going to go to the next organization. And so I think it's a dilemma, Michelle. I think it's I really think there's a reframing that needs to be done around when is enough, because I don't think it's sustainable to keep driving productivity at the cost of the worker. And I'm not a socialist, by the way. Like, I own my own business, and I want people to work, and I'm a for-profit, not-for-profit. But there needs to be some humanity brought into workplaces.
Yeah,
in my opinion.
I agree. I don't think AI that's been a bad decision for some organizations, and I'm very conscious of that. But AI should never be implemented for the sake of replacing a headcount. That's not where AI is going to lead to productivity. It's, to Peter's point, removing the mundane tasks, the tasks that lead to disengagement, the tasks that your employees don't enjoy doing, using AI to take away from that and then elevating the human skills of those employees and how that can lead to greater productivity. So it should never be designed and rolled out to try and reduce workforce numbers. If that's the primary purpose, it's just going to fail. It's not going to work. You've got to have that two sides to the rollout of that. You've got to look at the human being, and you've got to look at the AI and what you're trying to achieve. If you remove the human being from it, it's just going to fail.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Bridget made a comment there about 150 employees and 30 have been with you over 5 years. I think that goes right back to what Edan's talked about in the first instance about purpose. It's we are also a very purpose-led organisation here, and we've got an amazing team, and it is around people knowing that they're coming to add value, be valued, be recognised, and that they're seen as a human that needs to produce and needs to get stuff done and is accountable, but at the same time is acknowledged for being a human being that's got, joys and hobbies and partners and pets and all sorts of and good days and bad days. And I think a organisation that sees humans, not assets, is that's going to be the competitive advantage, because to Peter's point, AI is going to be the huge equalizer of information and technical skill. So the differentiator for further growth is going to be in the human skills, and only people that can keep the human skills and motivate them for discretionary effort. And I don't mean in more hours, I mean in more thinking, like wanting to do things differently and challenge and caring about what you're doing rather than just rocking up and clocking in. That's the difference. And that's where great leadership comes in.
If I could just add really quickly, I know we're about to run out of time, but just back to, I guess, the sort of core theme for the talk today around adaptive leadership is that we know that understanding people leads to great leadership leads to engagement, and great engagement leads to productivity. And so productivity, I guess what we're sort of talking about is that you don't have to compromise productivity to allow for individual personalization and for these changes in values that we're talking about. It's about adapting leadership style to connect to these values in a different way to still drive that engagement that leads to productivity. I think every generation that turns up to work wants to make an impact. Like, they want to deliver something. No one wants to turn up and sit around and do nothing. You just got to find the key to turn that on.
We have only got a couple of minutes, so I've just put this slide up. We won't go through it, but here's some tools, some organisations. McCrindle, as I said, obviously People Coach and Tally, we both work in this area. So if you want any extra information, come and see us. Also, Culture Amp, IMC, and In Truth are tools that you could look at to understand this generation more. With past questions, but of course, it's November for Movember. And we are for purpose organisations. And so particularly, Edan, if you want to do your pitch out.
Thank you. If you can get behind Movember, we do amazing work on a global scale. So if you are a man and, important for everyone around you, for you to live a happy, healthier life. And if you have a man in your life that you love, we are an institute of men's health. We do clinical research. We do academic research. We, and I want to say this webinar has gone for an hour, and I did say I would give a stat here. Within this hour, 60 men globally have taken their lives. So, this is what we're trying to change, right? So if you can get behind Movember, you don't need to grow a moustache. I'm doing a cycling challenge. I'm riding from my home in Ballarat to Richmond on Monday the 24th. It is going to kill me. I've done a couple of little test segments and even they killed me, but it's just really important to get behind. So if you can, thank you so much. We do amazing work. You can read all about the work that we do in the programs that we fund on Movember.com.
And, really our time is precious and important. We'd love to share. This is a free masterclass for you guys. So if you could put maybe what you would spend on a different masterclass through to Edan and the team at Movember, that would be amazing. I know everyone's time is precious. I'd like to thank you for your time. Peter, do you have any final words?
No, same. Thanks everyone for listening in and for listening to us waffle about leadership for an hour. And it's been great. And get behind Edan.
Yeah. And if you want to contact Peter or I, our contact details are there. Looking forward to connecting. Thanks so much, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Great to see you.
Bye.